All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all you magnificent melon heads of the world. Happy Monday, everybody. The new week is upon us. Today is March 3rd, 2025. We are almost through winter, just another month to go. And the top story this morning is European defense stocks are ripping higher in a big way off of the, should we call it a spat? Shall we call it a diplomatic impasse? Should we call it a fiasco or a CF? I don't know what you call it, but whatever that was at the Oval Office on Friday. Any way you look at it, who loses? Mostly men 18 to 50 who are going to keep having grenades dropped on their heads in trenches in Ukraine. And who wins? The military-industrial complex in Europe. How about that? Isn't it funny how that works out? So in case you were under a rock, what happened on Friday, stop me if you've heard this one, a comedian and a reality star LARPing as statesmen wander into the Oval Office and have an argument in front of the cameras that was very predictable, and some might even say almost, dare I say it, scripted. Look, Trump sets the tone. He makes a comment about what Zelensky's wearing as soon as he gets out of the limousine. And that was a planned comment because you knew Zelensky was going to show up in his silly outfit that he always wears because he's a wartime president, whatever. Okay, you want to make it look like he's come right fresh from the front lines. And then Zelensky goes into the Oval Office in front of the press and starts lecturing President Trump about holding talks with Putin. Well, gee, I don't know if that's in the diplomat's playbook, but going into somebody's house and then talking smack to them to their face in front of their own press corps, not really such a good idea. Maybe that guy has spent just a little bit too much time having rose petals dropped at his feet by these globalist Weffer types. And I don't know if he thought Trump was going to continue that trend, or even worse yet, he knew for a fact Trump would not continue that trend. So he said that on purpose just to torpedo the deal. And then, of course, JD Vance and President Trump were so easily baited by those comments that it just spiraled out of control into a fiasco. And look, depending on the political inclination of the commentator, you've got right-wingers who are saying Donald Trump showed he was so strong and independent and wasn't going to take any crap. And then you've got the predictable literally Hitler going on the other side. Forget all that political nonsense. Whatever it was BS, and the only winner was the military-industrial complex. Who are the people who really don't want this war to end? The military-industrial complex. I'm just throwing that one out there. You guys do what you want with it. But names like BAE Systems, Rheinmetall, Dassault, that they are ripping higher on this news because what is the ultimate outcome here? Europe is going to have to take a bigger responsibility for its own defense. And if this war in Ukraine is going to keep being propped up, well, then Europe is going to have to do it. The United States is not going to do it. And so a lot of European weapons are going to get sold and European stocks are ripping higher. And coincidentally, also over the weekend, France had their credit outlook cut to negative by S&P Global. You guys may not remember this, or I'm sure some of you remember this, but Europe has something of a budget crisis going on right now. Governments all across Europe collapsed last year in France and Germany because of budget impasses. They're spending so much money on their environmental agenda. And of course, social programs are so expensive and industry is largely in recession, especially in Germany. And so these countries are all up against constitutional budget limitations and debt limitations. Well, if you have to take a bigger responsibility for your own defense, and Germany's already talking about up to 400 billion euros of more defense spending, where are you going to get that money from? They're probably going to ditch their budget constraints and go deeper and deeper into debt. And so S&P Global, without mentioning defense spending, mind you, has cut France's credit outlook, although I'm having a hard time believing defense spending wasn't a factor in that cut. For some reason, it was left out in the article. See also military-industrial complex. Also going on over the weekend, President Trump sent Bitcoin prices sharply higher on Sunday when he tweeted, or whatever you call it, truth socialed about the U.S. strategic crypto reserve. Now, he really didn't say a lot. There's no official policy. He just said a thing. But Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, Cardano, and Solana are the coins that would hypothetically be included in this hypothetical crypto reserve, which I would add does not exist yet. He appointed a working group via executive order, and then on Sunday he said a thing about that executive working group and that executive order. We don't really know the legality of it until we know the form it's going to take. If the United States government is going to go out and just start buying crypto, that's probably not going to fly without an act of Congress, because Congress controls the purse strings. So it's important to pay attention to the detail and the nuance of what's being said. If they're talking about investing in crypto and buying crypto, you're going to need Congress for that. Now, the United States does have a huge stockpile of cryptocurrencies that have been seized from criminals. Every time assets get seized, if some money launderer is broken up or something, the Department of Justice ends up with a bunch of cryptocurrency on their books. And typically what they do is sell that on the open market. Well, you could direct those funds instead into a strategic crypto reserve. And maybe if you do that, you don't need an act of Congress. So until we know what they're actually going to do, it's just a Truth Social post at this point. But Bitcoin was sharply higher on that news. We also got more developments in that story that nobody is talking about, that server bust in Singapore. I talked about it in my live stream on Friday. 9 individuals were arrested. 3 were charged with fraud for smuggling NVIDIA chips into Singapore while falsifying the end user as a company called Luxuriate Your Life, which nobody's ever heard of. This is the first case of arrests being made in the illegal sales of AI chips into China, or the export control violation, something I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about. Shout out to my friend Kakashi on X, who has been all over this story for well over a year now. But they are saying that these servers were supplied by both Dell and Supermicro. Not at all surprised to see Supermicro on there. Dell, a little bit surprised to see that there. They falsified the end user certificate, and they're saying that these servers may contain NVIDIA chips. That's interesting, because you take the lid off the server and there's 72 great big giant NVIDIA logos staring at your face. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, those servers may contain NVIDIA chips. 72 NVIDIA logos. Dead giveaway. Know what I mean? So we got that one going on, and the mainstream press is still virtually radio silent on this. I've only seen Bloomberg cover it. CNBC hasn't covered it. Market Watch hasn't covered it. Wall Street Journal hasn't covered it. That's a pretty big story, guys. NVIDIA gets about 20% of their revenue from Singapore. We know most of that is coming from China. Anybody who is impartial, who looks at that, can tell it's going to China. Why won't they talk about that story? Got to keep that bubble inflating at any cost, right? Sell-side analysts don't like negative press. Also going on, tariffs, guys. It's March 3rd. March 4th is when the tariffs go into effect. There's an article in Bloomberg speculating that China may retaliate against U.S. agricultural commodities. That's really the only thing China has that they can retaliate against us with, because that's pretty much all they buy from us. They don't buy very much from us. So that's kind of along the playbook of the 2018, 2016 timeframe tariffs. The last time President Trump put those in place, China tried to retaliate against U.S. farmers with limited effect. And last but not least, I don't know if you guys heard this one, but there was a moon landing yesterday. Seriously, we landed on the moon yesterday. Why did this get no coverage? It's actually good news, and you'd think we'd hear more about it, but somebody landed on the moon. Let's talk about that. But first, we have to shrink my big melon of a head, and let's see what's going on in markets this morning. And if you please hit that like button for the algorithm and that subscribe button, because we do this every day. So come have your coffee with the melon heads as we go through markets. The S&P 500 right now is positive by 25 points, or 0.43% higher this morning. The Dow, meanwhile, is up 128, about 0.29% higher. And the NASDAQ is leading the way higher, up 154 points, 0.75% in the green this morning. Meanwhile, we have a sharply lower U.S. dollar, 106.79. That's down by 82 basis points, almost 0.75% here. What is going on with the weak dollar this morning? Well, we've got a stronger euro and a stronger British pound. And we've got this one in Bloomberg here. Bank of England may need to pause rate cuts, ex-officials warn. Now, I'm not going to get too much into this article here. Governor Bailey is basically projecting confidence. Oh, yeah, don't worry about inflation. Everything's fine. However, former BOE officials are saying, yeah, we're going to have to pause these rate cuts here because we're worried that inflation is coming back. So pausing rate cuts at the Bank of England, that would send the pound a little bit higher on that, at least the speculation that might be happening. The euro would probably follow suit. And so that's contributing to this weaker dollar this morning. Some hawkish words from central bank types over in Europe. Looking over at the bond market this morning, we've got yields are not moving very much here. They're a little bit higher. The 30-year Treasury's at 4.518. That's up a fraction of a point. The 10-year 4.247, up almost 2 points. The 2 years at 4.030, up 3.5 points. And the 1 month is up a little bit here, 4.313. That's a fraction of a point higher. Now, interestingly enough, guys, I wanted to point this one out. This is overnight reverse repos. Now, we used to talk about this a lot, and then it kind of fell out of the coverage because it hasn't been that big a deal. Big spike in reverse repos at the end of last week. We were down to about 63 billion, at one point 58 billion in the reverse repo. A lot of people have been wondering what happens when we get to zero with the reverse repo. Nobody really knows because this hasn't happened. Reverse repo never got as big as it did this time around. Now, you may look at this and say, this is nothing because look at all these other spikes that we've had before. It's not the first time this has happened, but this is the first time this has happened at the end of February. All these other spikes that we've seen typically come at the end of the quarter. And now we got this big spike at the end of February, which is not a quarter end. So this is a little bit out of place. I'm kind of surprised more people aren't talking about it. The only thing I can think of is we've had a big sell-off across a lot of different asset classes over the last couple of weeks. We had crypto sell-off, tech stocks sold off. We had yields. No, yields didn't really move higher. Gold sold off a little bit. So we had a lot of people moving into cash, and I suspect a lot of that cash ended up in money markets, and a lot of money markets parked their cash in overnight reverse repo. So I'm pretty sure it was the sell-off in risk assets, that deleveraging that's been going on in the market was partially responsible for this surge in reverse repo. Well, we'll keep an eye on that one. That one did jump out at me as a little odd over the weekend. Looking over at the commodities board, we've got gold is higher this morning, $2,871 for gold. That's up 13 bucks, a little less than 0.5% higher after a pretty rough week for gold. Gold took it over the head yesterday, or over the last week, but looking good so far to start this week. Silver is along for the ride, $31.68 for spot silver. That's up by 53 cents. 1.7% higher. I like the shiny. Copper is up by 2%. Platinum is higher by almost 4%. Palladium is also higher by 4%. Seems like this weaker dollar is driving metals higher across the board here. Even crude oil is up here by about 48 cents, $70.24 for April WTI futures. That's up by about 0.7%. And Bitcoin is higher this morning as well, $93,620 as priced on Coinbase. Let's zoom in a little bit here, guys, because we've had a lot of volatility in crypto over the last couple of days, right? We lost the 200-day moving average. We talked about that on Friday. We bounced back above it. And then, of course, this one right here, that big green candle, that was Trump's post on Truth Social about what happened with the strategic crypto reserve. That sent Bitcoin sharply higher. Now, we gave back a little bit of those gains. We went as high yesterday as about 95,000. Now we're down at 93.5. So it seems like this may have run its course a little bit. We'll see what he says at the State of the Union tomorrow. If he gets into crypto a little bit, that could potentially send it higher. And we still don't know what, if anything, official is going to come out of that working group for the strategic crypto reserve. But here's the story. Trump names cryptocurrencies in strategic reserve, sending prices higher. U.S. President Donald Trump on social media announced the names of 5 digital assets he expects to include in the new U.S. strategic reserve on Sunday. Trump said in a post on Truth Social that in his January executive order on digital assets would create a stockpile of currencies, including Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, Solana, and Cardano. The names had not been previously announced. So those 5 names went sharply higher over the weekend. Now, I would just point out here, analysts and legal experts are divided on whether an act of Congress will be necessary to set up the reserve. Some have argued that reserve could be created via the U.S. Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund, which can be used to purchase or sell foreign currencies. Would cryptocurrencies fall under that? That's wishy-washy language. Trump's crypto group had planned to look at potentially creating the stockpile with cryptocurrencies seized in law enforcement actions. And if you're talking about crypto seized and law enforcement actions, then you're not buying anything. You're not actually spending any money. And therefore, would you need an act of Congress? Maybe not. The legality of this is still in question. Until we know what this really looks like, all we can do is speculate. But for the time being, Bitcoin is higher on this news. Now we talk about the shocked reaction to the White House and Zelensky meeting sends European defense stocks soaring. This is the big story this morning. JP Morgan lifts the price targets of European defense companies by an average of 25%. It's almost like the people who sell guns and things that go boom wanted this to happen. Isn't that interesting? The shocking scenes of President Donald Trump and Vice President JD Vance dressing down Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the ensuing reaction from the European capitals sent Europe's defense stocks on Monday to their best day in years. And guys, cui bono is always what you got to ask. And well, look at what's going on in this chart. Look at the stocks in the European defense sector here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Look at Rheinmetall here, up. What is this? Since the start of the year, Rheinmetall up 82.8%. Leonardo up 65.4%. Dales, I don't know what they make, up 56.7%. BAE Systems up 40.7%. Look at European defense stocks doing so well here. The defense industrial complex just loves this story, doesn't it? The expectations of extra spending also boosted the euro, as well as the yield on the 10-year German Bund. That may be contributing to that certainly is contributing to that big drop in the Dixie this morning. The biggest news came from Germany, where Bild and other publications report that the country's centrist parties are working on creating two large fiscal funds outside of the constitutional debt break with at least 200 billion euros for a special defense fund. The report also cites studies that Germany may need up to 400 billion euros of defense spending, as well as 500 billion euros in public investment. There had already been talks of the centrist parties using their brief time before a new parliament for extra spending, but the Oval Office blowout appeared to accelerate that. So look, the Europeans, they're serious about spending money on defense here. Now, the centrist parties kind of lost the election in Germany, but they're like, oh, we have this constitutional debt limit, but we're going to create a separate fund that's outside of the constitutional limit before we all leave office because the voters rejected us. And then we're going to put a whole bunch of billions of euros of defense spending in that, even though that's not what the voters voted for. Either way you look at it, guys, the people who make missiles and things that go boom, they're going to get their money. That is the takeaway from this one. We already looked at those stocks. And coincidentally, while Europe is talking about blowing all of this money on defense spending, S&P revises outlook on France to negative. This one just hit over the weekend as well. Global credit rating agency S&P revised its outlook on France to negative from stable on Friday, citing rising debt, political gridlock on budget deficits, and uncertain growth. You'll notice they didn't mention defense spending there. Why would you not mention defense spending? There is no way plans for hundreds of billions of euros in additional defense spending is not playing a role in this credit downgrade, but they're not talking about it. Well, we wouldn't want to say anything that frustrates the military-industrial complex. The agency also affirmed its rating for France at AA negative after cutting it from AA last May. France's public finances spiraled out of control last year as a political crisis left 4 successive governments paralyzed and incapable of tackling an unexpected drop in tax income and a surge in spending for a second year. The negative outlook on France reflects rising government debt amid weak political consensus for tackling France's large underlying budget deficits against a backdrop of more uncertain economic growth prospects. Once again, no mention of defense spending here. Obviously, it's playing a role here. Why are they not saying it? So oftentimes it's what they don't say that reveals their motives. So that's going on this morning as well. Now, let's shift gears a little bit to this story. The story nobody is talking about. And you see what I did there? Servers used in Singapore fraud case may contain NVIDIA chips, minister says. Yes, that big NVIDIA logo there, dead giveaway. Servers used in a fraud case that Singapore announced last week were supplied by U.S. firms, plural, more than one, and may have contained NVIDIA's advanced chips, a government minister said on Monday. 3 men, including a Chinese national, were charged with fraud last week in Singapore. Domestic media linked the case to the transfer of NVIDIA's AI chips from Singapore to Chinese artificial intelligence firm DeepSeek. Once again, that story that isn't happening happened again. And guys, this played out exactly how I described in my video about NVIDIA's dirty secret, or the worst kept secret on Wall Street, the illegal sales into China via Singapore and Malaysia. We assessed that the servers may contain NVIDIA's chips. Singapore's Home Affairs and Law Minister, somebody I can't pronounce, told reporters on Monday. He said the servers involved in the case were supplied by Dell Technologies and Super Microcomputer. Oh, there's that name again, SMCI. They were supplied to Singapore-based companies before they were sent on to Malaysia. Whether Malaysia was the final destination, we do not know for certain at this point, he said, adding that the authorities were investigating the case independently after an anonymous tip-off. And the fact that a Chinese national was included in those arrested and charged with fraud, obviously Malaysia was not where these things were ultimately bound for. Obviously, this textile company, Luxuriate Your Life, was not the end user. These were clearly being sent to China. And, well, somebody is finally doing something about it. By the way, an anonymous tip-off. I wonder who that was. Interesting there. So more to come on this one. And, guys, I would just add violating export controls. Each individual case of violating export controls is punishable by up to $1 million fine and 20 years in prison. And from everything I have read, the U.S. is not screwing around when it comes to this subject. There's a lot of people on Twitter who are just like, oh, well, these guys have no control over what the people are buying their product do with it. Export controls do not work that way. If there is ample evidence that the information on the purchase order is fraudulent and, Luxuriate Your Life, a company nobody has ever heard of, obviously not the end user. If you fill that order when there is obvious evidence that this stuff is not going to where they're saying it's going, then you are complicit in those export controls violation and you are on the hook for it. You can't play dumb. It doesn't work. All right, shifting gears. Let's talk a little bit about tariffs, because everybody's talking about tariffs in the mainstream press today. They're going to hit tomorrow. We'll probably know more. Is there going to be a last minute delay? Is there going to be a last minute, we're negotiating, so we'll give them another month? Or are they actually going to go through with it? We don't know. But for now, let's talk about what might be coming back if we do this. China may hit U.S. crops in response to tariffs, according to the Global Times. China is considering retaliatory measures on U.S. agriculture and food products in response to tariffs from the Trump administration that are scheduled to take effect on Tuesday, according to the Global Times. The response from Beijing will likely include tariffs and non-tariff measures, the Communist Party-backed news outlet reported on Monday, citing a person it didn't identify. Wonder if he's related to that Familiar with the Matter guy. In the Global Times, which didn't provide specific details, is occasionally used to signal China's positions to the outside world. The threat of an escalating trade war drove prices of Chinese soy meal used in food and animal feed almost 3% higher, the most in more than 3 weeks. A disruption to U.S. soybean shipments could tighten the market further. So this is largely following the playbook from the last time we put tariffs on China. They retaliated against American farmers. It's probably what they're going to do here. And another one I wanted to talk about, some good news here. And I'm really surprised that this didn't get more coverage. Space stocks climb after a successful private landing on the moon. Hey, 2020's bingo update. Some good news. A private company landing on the moon. How does something like this fly under the radar? Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost mission landed on the lunar surface on Sunday. Space stocks are climbing in pre-market trade on Monday after the private space company Firefly Aerospace successfully landed on the moon. The Cedar Park, Texas-based company said that its uncrewed Blue Ghost lander softly touched down on the lunar surface in an upright, stable configuration. Firefly Aerospace Blue Ghost Mission 1, dubbed Ghost Riders in the Sky, is part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services initiative to deliver science and technology payloads to the moon. Space stocks have been lifted by the successful landing, with shares of rival space exploration company Intuitive Machines up 2.9% pre-market. Last year, Intuitive Machines' uncrewed Odysseus lander became the first American spacecraft to reach the lunar surface since Apollo 17's Challenger lunar module. All these private companies are going to the moon. I had no idea this was even happening. The lander toppled onto its side during the landing near the moon's south pole, but was still able to communicate with flight controllers. The mission ended 7 days after reaching the lunar surface. So this Firefly landing, I guess, does stand out from that prior landing. They weren't first, but they were the first company to land on the moon and not tip over. So that's a milestone, I guess. Hey, a little bit of good news. We don't just do the doom and gloom here, right? Every now and then you get something to feel good about. I was happy to see this story. And I just want to say thank you so much to Mr. Armando Reyes. Thank you, Armando, for the super chat, for supporting the channel. He says, hey, everybody, I saved a lot of money on my car insurance by switching to Geico. Okay, well, congratulations. I did the same a few years ago, but this is not brought to you by Geico. But hey, Geico, give me a call, make me an offer. Sure, I'll entertain anything. Thank you, Armando, for supporting the channel. And thank you to Joey Sox, who says, Trump making suggestions on crypto, SEC legal. You know, I didn't talk about this, an oversight on my part, but I should have mentioned it. Somebody made a very big levered bet on Bitcoin, like a 50x levered bet on Bitcoin right before this True Social announcement was made. And they made millions of dollars on that deal. I don't know who it was. Nobody knows who it was. I don't know if it was President Trump. Was it one of his lackeys? Was it some of these crypto guys that are advising him? Somebody knew it was coming and made a big bet. Now, is the SEC going to police it? Probably not. The SEC is pulling back from crypto. Charges were just dropped against Justin Sun last week for his insider trading and his unregistered securities. Look, guys, all I can tell you is whatever. I think some of the crypto regulation under the Biden administration went too far and went to the wrong places. I think they were too focused on KYC and on tracking everybody's transactions when what they should have been focused on was prosecuting the freaking criminals who, in my opinion, can be prosecuted under existing laws without worrying about whether Bitcoin is a freaking security or a commodity or definitions. Who cares? Fraud is fraud. Prosecute these a-holes. We didn't need to change the definition of a security in order to put Sam Bankman-Fried in jail. So I think we're going in the other direction now. All I can tell you guys is be ready for winter. I've said this a couple of times now over the last couple of weeks. You know, we're going to do our crypto Ned Stark. Winter is coming. It will get here eventually, and the price will drop substantially when it happens. It has happened several times before. It'll happen again. So be careful going on leverage. That's all I can tell you guys, because if you're levered up, if you're borrowing money to buy crypto and the price falls, you are going to get wiped out. If you buy with your own money and the price falls, you can sit through winter and you can wait until the next halving cycle, and then you can ride it back up, which is what I did through all of the last winter. All right. All I can do, if you don't prepare for winter, you're going to get wiped out. So SEC legal, I think it's questionable whether it's legal. Let's put it that way. What they're putting into the crypto reserve, that's going to be challenged in court, right? Some judge from the liberal district of blankety blank is probably going to say, no, you can't do that. And then it's going to end up going to a higher court, and it may or may not uphold, right? It's going to follow everything else Trump has done. Some liberal judge is going to block it, and then some other judge is either going to unblock it or not. And until we know what it looks like, all we can do is speculate. So I think the big question is, if the government is talking about buying any of these cryptocurrencies, that is a legal minefield if they're going to actually buy it. I would also add, it is freaking stupid for the government to go buy these cryptocurrencies, because they would be buying them with borrowed and printed money, and that's only going to make the government's problems and our problems even worse. So I hope they're not talking about buying these things. Feel free to go ahead. You know, you seize them from criminals, sure, put it into a crypto reserve for the government, and then, you know, one day they're probably going to monetize that by revaluing it, and who knows what they're going to do with it. But to outright take money from the U.S. Treasury and go buy these things, no, I don't like that. That just stinks to me. And I don't want the government doing that either. I don't want all this centralization. The biggest draw for me for Bitcoin in the first place was the fact that the government and Wall Street doesn't control it. And with all of these ETFs and funds and everything in the futures market, all the ways traditional finance is encroaching on the crypto space, it's more centralization, and it's getting less and less like Satoshi's original vision. So there's things I like about it. Yeah, I want to see the price go higher, but I don't want the government to control it either. So Anyways, that was probably a much longer-winded response than you were looking for, Joey Socks, but thank you for supporting the channel nonetheless. And thank you, everybody, for having your coffee with the Melonheads this morning. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for the super chats, and thank you to my Patreon supporters and magnanimous Melonheads on Patreon. You guys rock. Don't forget that like button and the subscribe button on the way out. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I love you guys. Until next time, everybody, live small and dream big.